Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome here. This is actually the first Zoom of the new year with Social Rights Ireland and the Peadar Socialist Republican Forum. It's a new year and we're looking forward to a progressive new year, but an awful lot of have unfolded over the machine of imperialism doesn't stop for Christmas or for holidays or for New Year's. And what we're seeing now is more escalation of war, of the threat of war, and World War III continuing to manifest itself, in particular in the Middle East and more recently in Venezuela. So tonight's discussion especially was titled that it's a new theatre but the same script. Western media lies about Iran. So we're going to focus on Iran tonight because despite the change in headlines and the talking points, the core narrative rarely ever changes. And again, we're seeing that Iran is presented to us through distortion, through lies, actually, through selective outrage, through particular stories that serve US imperialism and, of course, the Zionist entity, rather than the actual truth. So Tommy once said, I thought it was an interesting phrase, you've listened to the news, now here's the truth. And that's what we aim to do tonight. So from the sanctions that have been framed as humanitarian to weaponized human rights language, open talk of war, open talk of regime change, this Western media coverage is telling us more actually about Western interests than about an Iranian society or lived reality. So what's missing actually in the context of Western media narratives, stories, newspapers, headlines is the voices of ordinary people, the context, the history. So this meeting isn't necessarily about defending any state uncritically. It's about challenging propaganda. It's about asking harder questions. And it's about refusing to accept narratives that normalise Western interference and Western interventions in sovereign countries. We're really glad to welcome our panellists from the Peadar Socialist Republican Forum, Barry Murray and Tommy McKerney, Dr. Saeed Shah, son of Gaza, and Morgan O'Hearda, who's in Cork at the minute, and Stephen Roach, you're going to contribute to the conversation, after which we'll have a Q&A which won't be recorded. So first of all, I'd invite Tommy to maybe give a broad overview, and I'm going to ask you to unmute from an anti-imperialist perspective, Tommy.
Thank you, Roisin. I think we've got to think of the history of this region to put it in perspective. In 1953, there had been a democratically elected president of an Iranian Republic, Mohammad Mossadegh, and he nationalized the oil fields so that the people of Iran would benefit from the wealth that would lay under their soil. But a conspiracy between the CIA and MI6 staged a coup in 1953, overthrew the democratically elected regime, and placed in its place a monarchy, a dictatorship under the Pahlavi monarchy. And thereafter, they ruled with an iron fist, abolished democratic rights, had a particularly nasty security service similar to the Gestapo, brutalized their citizenry until 1979, when an uprising took place to overthrow the Shah of Iran, who fled, of course, to his supporters in the United States of America. Now, in case anybody thinks that there's a made-up story with that, in 2013, the CIA actually admitted its role in the 1953 coup in Iran. The reason behind Iran is it's one of the largest oil fields in the world. And it has, since 1979, it has been an anti-imperialist stronghold. It has supported the rights of the Palestinian people. It has supported the rights of the people of Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, against the incursions from the Zionist state. Not only that, but it has proven that it's a thorn in the side of global imperialism. So whenever we see this outbreak of protest. Now, there may well be some genuine reasons for some of the protest. Can't dismiss that. What I have to take on board is that this, whatever discontent there may be in Iran, has been used and utilized by subversive forces from the West. There's little doubt that the CIA, MI5, and Mossad has had a part in it to this extent. And at the moment, the son of the late Shah, a guy called Reza Pahlavi, has offered his services from the safety of the United States of America to again go back, set up a monarchy, and rule in Iran. Now, the fact is that this is not accidental. This has been supported, obviously, from the United States. But the fact is that what they are doing is imperialism is using the ancient tactic of divide, conquer, and rule. There is, of course, a certain small number of people in Iran who favoured the old regime because they benefited from it. And now they will come out and they will exploit whatever discontent there is. And there's no doubt that whenever the government of Iran says that the opposition is emerging on behalf of Donald Trump, the European Union, and the Zionist regime in Palestine, there's truth in that, because otherwise it wouldn't have taken the nature of it. Iran is a critical, crucial part of the anti-imperialist movement in the world. It may not be everybody's ideal, but it certainly is taking a stand against the domination of imperialism from the West and its basic garrison in Palestine, the Zionist regime in Palestine. Now, why will this impact on Ireland? Of course it will. We've seen over the last few weeks, we've seen the United States kidnapping the head of state of a sovereign nation in Venezuela, threatening to take control of Greenland, and to take control of Greenland because that it's seen as a strategically important asset. Venezuela has been part of what we're now calling the Monroe Doctrine, play on the old words for the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States deemed itself entitled to rule entire Americas. They're talking now about the Western Hemisphere as if they have access to it. And there would come a time where maybe they could decide that Ireland would form part of its deem Ireland a necessary asset in its search for global domination. So imperialism, if it's to be defied or held back, we've got to take on board that those that support anti-imperialism are entitled to our support. We have to see what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, what's happening in Iran at the moment, and see it in a global context of imperialism. It's imperialism attempting to dominate the entire world, which is its objective. And in the process, it will obviously include Ireland at some stage. We can't be selfish about this, because we have to insist that we can't wait until something happens to us. We've got to help those that are struggling against imperialism across the globe. So perhaps maybe I'll leave it at that, if that's...
Thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you, and for zooming out to zooming in back home. Barry, I'm going to come over to you just on the point that where Tommy has left off, where we're looking at from our own context here in Ireland, like as apart from the fact, as Tommy said, that they can come for us next. Already we understand and see the effects, and we are subjugated to a large extent to the US, to Washington, to Brussels, to London as well. So maybe what's your view on that? Would you, when it comes to just even imperialism and how we are affected here at home? Like we can say Yankee go home out of Venezuela or out of Iran, but I mean, Yankee go home, get out of Shannon Airport, get out of the economic dominance that we're strangled by.
Well, of course, sometimes when we think of imperialism, we think about it in militaristic terms, and that's an important part of it. But probably in the case of Ireland, the biggest pressure and grip that imperialism has on Ireland is through the FDA. That's a major contribution to the coffers of the comprador class in Ireland. It doesn't apply a lot of people, but it's there, and it's a big cash cow for the government authorities. The thing about that is then that once you have the business, the economic side of it, then you have to be party to their economic wars as well. There's an issue then of security, the security of undersea cables, the security of the data centres. I mean, that's a big thing in Ireland. I mean, it's probably one of the leading places in Europe for data centres at the minute, and they seem to be going to make they want to even make it bigger if they can possibly manage that. So all of that then leads to you being part of their security apparatus, which brings you into NATO, which brings you into PESCO, and which gets you to remain silent and gets the Free State government to remain silent on the atrocities committed by imperialism anywhere in the world. So the silence is complicity with any of these atrocities that are happening around the world, be it in Gaza, be it in Venezuela, as the case is now, and they intend to obviously do something similar in Iran if they can manage it.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. And it's interesting because while we were out on the streets and have been protesting and demonstrating and organising for Palestine and screaming at RTE saying, speak up about Palestine, there was no hesitation this week about putting Iran on the news from a US, the Western perspective as well. There was no hesitation whatsoever. But we'll maybe come to that later on, Stephen, when we're talking about how the media has shaped the narrative. Going to go over to you, Saeed, next. Thanks for joining us tonight from Belfast. You might need to unmute first of all, Saeed. I'm just broadly going to ask you for an overview of the current situation, and I know that you will have good historical knowledge to bear, which is important for context.
Hello to you and to everybody. That will need a long time, your question, but I'll do my best to shorten my answer as much as I can. If we take it from the year of early 70s, when the United States of America decoupled itself from the gold base for their dollar, and then linked itself with a deal with the Saudis from the 73, 74 onwards, to use allow only the petrol or the oil to be sold in dollar. So from the golden base of the gold for the dollar, which is the French, what's his name? Charles de Gaulle was the first one who said in the 60s they are not interested in taking these green bills, which America just print. They wanted their own gold back to France and stuff like that. So the depleted gold in the United States of America pushed them to do the deal with in the Middle East with the Saudis. The Saudis then imposed it in OPEC, which is the organization of producers of oil in the world. Saudi Arabia was the top dog in there. So the United States of America got the what they call it, the petrodollar in here, so they can print again without any hesitation. In the region, there is, we know now, Venezuela #1 reserve of the oil, and it's not just about the oil. I want to link it to the dollar. Venezuela's oil is very heavy oil, and it's not that profitable. Even the oil industrialist told Trump that one it take 16 years and nearly 180 billion to to prepare it for the production of 3 million, if you like. That's a huge and foreign history. The problem for Trump and for the United States of America in here was Venezuela was selling the oil to China with the Chinese currency, and the Chinese accepted the Venezuelan currency, and that is taking a huge chunk from the oil sale internationally from the dollar, which weakened the dollar and weakened the position of the United States of America as a hegemonic kind of like Trump liked to think of himself like the only king of the kings in the world. This is the Venezuela. Saudi Arabia is still even breaking away from dollar and is starting doing its own trade with the Chinese. And even geopolitically, Saudi Arabia trying to at least distance a little bit itself from American total hegemony. We witnessed that in Yemen in the late clashes between the Emiratis and the other thing and the Saudis, which is that as well was part of the Zionists tried to dominate the seas around Saudi Arabia and around the Arabian Gulf and that area, and to surround Iran from that area. So the third reserve in the world of that kind of thing as well is Iran. And Iran doesn't use as well the dollar. In a lot of its trade, it gives the Chinese a huge amount of their needs, and it uses with the strategic alliance with the Iranian and the Chinese that kind of dependent on the Chinese yuan and the Iranian rial. And that's what's happening in the background of what's happening today in Iran. It's in the 2015 there was a kind of agreement between the United States of America, the European Troika, with Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, China, and Russia about the Iranian nuclear program. That's a program they called the agreement JCPOA, which is a joint kind of agreement of action between the Iranian and the international community about controlling the Iranian nuclear program. And as long as and they allowed Iran to be able to enrich uranium to the limit of 3.76 in there, which is below what can be for civil, which is the Iranian all along. They said their program was civil. But then in 2018, Trump suddenly pulled the United States of America out of Paris global warming kind of protocols and out of the JCPOA with Iran. And suddenly the Iranians find themselves, they surrendered a lot of conditions and terms to the Europeans and to the Americans, and they have no agreement. And the European promised at that time they will cover all the points which the American going to slap the sanctions on the Iranian because of the collapse of the agreement. But they didn't do anything. And then all of that year from 2018 to 25, while the Iranians sitting with the American negotiating the deal again, the American went with the Zionist entity and attacked Iran in a 12 days war. So the Iranian pulled themselves out, and you declaring to the world you destroyed all the nuclear facilities, and now you're claiming there is 400 or something kilograms of enriched uranium. So Europeans came back in a sneaky kind of way against a United Nations resolution which governed all of this, called the number 2031 resolution, I believe. They said they were going to slap something called the snapback mechanism, which means if they found the Iranian not compliant, that means the whole sanctions will go back on Iran. Without going into much details in that, they done this, the British, the Germans, and the French, to appease Trump. They didn't care about what the implication of that will be in the civilians in Iran, in their markets, in their thing. Once you sanction a country to extreme level, on top of what the already United States of America. I'll remind you, was something in here similar in a TV interviews maybe 15 or 20 years ago. Madeleine Albright used to be the United States of America's foreign secretary. The interviewer asked her, I think from ABC News in the United States of America, the killing of or the death of 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions were imposed by United States of America and the European, was it worth it? And she answered, yes, indeed, it was worth it. This is the way they think of people's lives. And when you see, at the time myself, I remember commenting on the snapback mechanism. I said the impact of that going to be psychological more than anything, from a speculation more than anything, because it's going to target the nuclear and it's going to target the defense and stuff. But once you see the psychological impact on their Iranian currency, it's become like 1.5 million of the Iranian currency equal to $1. So it started within the bazaar, which is the people have legitimate grievances in there. Their income cannot cover much because of the European and the American sanctions on them. The government acknowledged that is a hugely legitimate concerns for economical thing, and they understand. But suddenly that was armed because of the failure of the 12-day war by the United States of America and the Zionist entity on the Iranian. That was armed straight away with the Pompeo himself, who used to be the head of the CIA, in a statement he said, I congratulate the Mossad on the ground and with the rioters. They are doing a great job. This CIA chief acknowledged what the Mossad and the CIA is doing on the ground on Iran, killing children, burning ambulance driver, a lady, a mother of 3, killing hundreds of police officers and all of that. Since when you can see demonstrators carrying Kalashnikovs and Molotov cocktails and burning mosques and government building and stuff? So it's another phase from the same colored revolution book of a regime change, which the United States of America never stopped using the same textbook in every country in the world, thinking all the people look the same, all the cultures the same on the, bringing all that round in a nutshell. It's since 1979, the United States of America thought before that, maybe months in middle 79, after taking Egypt from the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union at the time, to be under the domination of the United States of America and the Zionist entity today, suddenly they were faced with a revolution which is equal to the Bolshevik Revolution or the French Revolution of its impact in the region. So instead, the whole region will be tilted to the United States of America. The Iranian Revolution brought balance back in the area, and suddenly we have somebody replacing revolutionary Egypt become revolutionary Iran, because Iran Shah was unbelievably kind of worse than fascist. It's a tyrant, was directed at the Southern Arabian Liberation Movement, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Bahrain, the Popular Front for the Liberation of the South of Arabia. All of these liberation, which would have turned the Gulf states into a socialist republic at the time, were destroyed and decimated by the Shah. And so removing that man from that area and his regime and bringing revolutionary in Iran and taking the hands of America out of the pockets of the Iranian people and the British as well, and bringing people their own wealth to their country, the Americans weren't happy at all. They wanted, kept from 1979 till today, trying every year kind of another color revolution, another regime change, another this, another that, infiltrating Iran from the north of Iraq or Tajikistan or this area or Azerbaijan with so many agents of Mossad and CIA and MI6 to create this country. The assassination of its own scientists, own leadership, own thinker is in a huge scale. Yearly, they didn't give them a chance to breathe since the 1979 revolution. All the resources of the reactionary forces in the region, led by the Zionist entity, United States of America, and the MI6, are working in Iran to stabilize. But I can assure them, if you look at the streets of Tehran today, seeing the president of Iran leading many millions in the street, this is the key factor in here, the unity of the population behind its leadership. This is how they defeated the Zionists and the American attack on Iran in last June. And now they proved it tonight. This riots and this is CIA, Mossad enabled coup attempts failed. And it's failing right now in front of our own eyes because of the Iranian people unity against the enemy.
Thank you, Saib. Yes, and always so articulate and bringing us through the decades and sometimes the centuries as well. But good, I know it's hard to do that when you're under time pressure. On that point of bringing it up to the here and the now, Morgan, I'm going to come to you to look at like the reality chasm and who actually is being killed and how. And looking at the recent, yes, the 12-day war, but even comparing to what's happening now in the last few days to what happened in 2022. Can you share your analysis with us?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think one of the key things we need to talk about is just how disassociated from reality the Western media narrative is at the moment. So a lot can be gleaned from it. The Western media narrative, of course, was in this case delayed, which can be interpreted in a number of different ways. But I favoured the interpretation that it was due to the uncertainty about whether they would try to capitalise, or the security services would try and capitalise on the protests, which were genuine, of course, in the early days. So what emerged in the first couple of days was, obviously, there's a lot of speakers on platforms in public areas lamenting the economy, and for very genuine reasons. And every now and then, someone would come up, some agent provocateur or maybe some brainwashed college kid or something, and they would proclaim, down with the Ayatollah or something to that effect, and they would be moved along because the crowds that were gathered weren't interested in that. It was purely economic concerns that that the bulk of the protesters were concerned with. So after days passed, obviously a decision was made from in other countries to try and capitalize on this and use the cells that were lying dormant in Iran to try and create violence and create instability to see can they capitalize on it. So when the Western media narrative was developed and presented to us, it got pretty ludicrous very fast. So reports of deaths initially were specific numbers, 54 dead, 63 dead, something like that, to make it seem like almost scientific. But within 2 days, that had gone up by an order of magnitude. A few days ago, I saw reports of 2,000 protesters dead, and today the BBC even reported 10,000 protesters dead, which is just absolutely mad. So at various stages, they proclaimed like different cities had been lost to the protesters. There was defections within the high-rank generals in the military were defecting. And I could see a lot of commentary online just from casual observers thinking, oh, the writings on the wall, the Islamic Revolution, Iran are going to, the Iranian leadership is going to be overthrown. That was never the reality. So we have to analyze and perhaps even commend the Iranian response to all of this. The tactics they deployed were very different from 2022. They were dealing with much smaller protests, in many ways, much more violent protests, considering the size of them. What they did, they didn't seem to crack down very hard on the protests initially, although they did turn violent after a week or so. So there was gun battles. There were a lot of terrorist style attacks on the security services. As Saeed mentioned, there is potentially hundreds of police killed in Iran in the last couple of weeks. I think I saw some Persian media say the death toll for police was over 100 about 3 days ago. So it's not impossible that it has reached 200. Compare that to the amount of people that have died in the protests. I don't think it's an extreme number of protesters having been killed. I think a lot of the protesters that saw the violence basically went home, because a lot of the attacks on the security services are not occurring from within the protests, although that has occurred as well. But they've been, as I say, terrorist attacks on security services in isolated areas. What the Iranians have done is they've chosen a tactic of identifying the ringleaders, identifying the foreign agents, and later arresting them. One of the ways they did this was obviously to shut down the internet. 4 or 5 days ago, I don't remember what day it was, this was portrayed in the West as they're hiding their abhorrent crimes against the people, the innocent peaceful protesters. What they were actually doing, as it transpires, was they were trying to isolate those using the Starlink system, which would be predominantly foreign agents. So once they shut down the internet, those using the Starlink system, to quote someone in the Iranian government, lit up like a Christmas tree, and they were able to target them. So there's countless terror cells and Mossad cells, foreign agents, having been rounded up via this method. And as I understand it, the internet is actually coming back in Iran today as we speak. So I think that shows the success of this particular tactic. As I mentioned as well, there have been large government rallies. A lot of the videos coming from Iran now over the last 48 hours have shown potentially millions of people on the street, including, of course, you mentioned Pezeshkian being involved in a large protest in Tehran today, pro-government rally. It does look like they've weathered this storm, this particular storm. However, Iran are no fools. They know that they're involved in a hybrid war. It can take many different forms, and anything can happen at any given day, considering who their enemies are. But they seem as prepared as they've ever been because they dealt with these protests far better than 2022. Now, one thing I will mention as well, because it actually occurred to me when I was listening to Saib, that a few years ago I was a member of a party that would remain unnamed, and I remember there was people within that party. The Mahsa Amini protest occurred. Now, Mahsa Amini, just to remind people, was a young Iranian woman who died in police custody because she was detained for not wearing a hijab in a particular area that I think you're meant to wear a hijab now. The Western stories, of course, to this day, maintain that she was beaten to death in custody. However, I've seen videos myself released by the Iranian authorities that showed that she unfortunately died of heart failure whilst talking to someone in a holding area in a police station. Now, whether she should have been there or not, that's a discussion for other people. That's not really my business. Unfortunately, she did die of natural causes. But it was seized upon by the West anyway, and as a result, like wide-scale violence occurred in Iran. And I remember at one point there was a story carried in The Guardian that described these two young men. I think they were mid-20s and late 20s, these two Iranian men. Very presentable young men. I think they were students, but they were due to be executed for crimes that were never described in The Guardian because they were described as protesters for women's rights. And there was these people there's members of the party at the time that were trying to get the senior members of the party, the elected officials, to give statements about this execution and how abhorrent it is. Like this is a terrible tragedy that's happening. And of course, it took me 5 minutes of looking on Twitter for Iranian news after copying and pasting their names into the search bar to find out that there was a court case and that there was 3 different videos presented of their crime, 3 different angles of them mass murdering 4, I think, police cadets when they were drinking coffee on the street corner during the day. I had to mention that to these people, and I suppose that dampened their spirits. But it just goes to show that people have such a warped idea of what's going on in Iran. Anytime these protests occur, it's a failure of analysis, it's a failure of understanding how the world works. And I suppose it's the success of imperialist media. And I suppose people like us need to work hard to try and counteract that. And that's why tonight is perhaps important as well for some people. Back to the 2025 and 26 protests now, seeing as we're in January, like some of the people that have died as well, some of the horrible stories that I think have galvanized the Iranian people around protecting the government, protecting the state as it's currently constituted. Like there was a horrible story of a 3-year-old girl, Melina Asadi, who was shot dead in her father's arms as they were going to the pharmacy in the evening. And I saw a story again of an 8-year-old girl who was also shot. Her funeral was the last 2 days. I don't recall her name, unfortunately. And these kind of stories, of course, should be presented in Western media, but obviously that doesn't fit the narrative of what the security services and the state wants to achieve. You look at other kind of like elements of what they've described in the West. There's this famous image of a woman burning an image of the Ayatollah whilst lighting a cigar, and presented as like, oh, this brave Iranian woman in Tehran, these mass protests, and obviously a huge public support. It turns out that she was a Zionist based in Canada, and I think she was a social media influencer as well. So I could see that her image was shared by Roisin Murphy, disappointingly, that the Wicked Witch who wrote Harry Potter, I forget her name, is not J.K. Rowling. These big sort of like feminist figures on Twitter. That just again shows the success of this propaganda, but just interrogate it slightly and it all falls apart. So at the moment, what the authorities are doing, having rounded up the various agents and cells, they've created an expedited judiciary process in order to convict and execute these foreign agents. And I think they will be doing so, many of them publicly, over the next week. more so as a message to the West, I think, and anyone else who wants to try and do what these agents did the next time. Because what the Iranians have pulled off this time is actually quite spectacular. So the jamming systems that they used to take out Starlink as well, because they did take out Starlink after identifying the agents, which shut them off from their handlers, shut them off from Mossad, the foreign intelligence services. That has never been achieved before. And there's been speculation where they got these jamming systems from Russia or China. If it's from Russia, questions need to be asked why this hasn't been deployed in Ukraine before. If they got them from China, similar questions should probably be asked by the Russians as to why they haven't been able to use this in Ukraine as well. So that's another interesting story that we're going to learn a lot more about over the coming weeks. But there's also another thing that I found quite interesting was that there was, after a week of the protest, there was these terrorist cells going over the Iraqi border into Iran. These, I think, well, they're considered terrorists in Iran. So I'm afraid I don't know much about this group. It's the PJAK, the Kurdistan Free Life Party. They are enemies of the Turkish state. They're enemies of the Iranian state, and they're considered terrorists by both. Evidently, there's been strong reports that MIT, the Turkish security services, actually tipped off the Iranian authorities as to who was traveling over the border, when and where, and they were rounded up immediately. So this is an interesting collaboration between the Turkish and Iranian security services, and I was so surprised by this that I had to look further into it, and it transpires that it's not the first time they've done it. They've actually collaborated in Syria to target PJAK leadership as well. So that was an interesting thing I learned. So now that the protests are dying out, and now that the Iranian authorities they're effectively taking a victory lap as far as I'm concerned today. You think about the implications of the foreign interests in another failed revolution. This tactic, I don't think, can work for a considerable period of time. I think they've burned a lot of their assets, their cells in the 2022 protests and in the 12-day war in particular. And now they're arming these cells with small arms, I noticed, rather than the more high-grade weaponry that was used internally against the Iranian government in June of 2025. I suppose this is quite interesting to see because the same tactics are being deployed, but as Kit Clarenberg would say, to ever-diminishing returns. Perhaps this method of regime change might be dead in the water in Iran for a considerable period of time, which begs the question, what is the next step for the West? Because whether they think they can realistically topple the Iranian state or not, they simply have to try. And they will try because imperialism requires it. They're at the state of decay and the state of moral decay and economic decay that they simply have to target and defeat Iran. Now, I think Iran have developed far enough along the line that they cannot do that anymore. They had their opportunity in the multipolar, I suppose, world of the 90s and into the early 2000s. But I think we've mentioned it before, but a lot of credit needs to be given to, I suppose, the Syrian people and Hezbollah in particular, that they bogged them down, and the IRGC, of course, that they bogged them down in Syria for so long that Iran was able to develop, Russia was able to develop systems, China was able to use their soft power globally. And we no longer live in the unipolar world. America has missed this opportunity to overthrow Iran by conventional means. And that only leaves the military option. The military option is limited insofar as, sure, they have conventional weapons, they have unconventional weapons that could do untold damage to Iran. But in doing so, they know very well that their proxies in the region risk being wiped out as well, because the Iranian missile technology that they've developed renders, I suppose, the highest grade of the missile technology that they've developed renders air defense useless. So I'm a bit of an air defense skeptic, as I've noticed in Ukraine and in Israel and in Iran in recent years. When you're talking about hypersonic missiles, you're really limited in what you can do. And the systems that they developed, the missile technology that they developed in Russia and Iran, exceed the ability of the conventional weapons that's been displayed by the West and the NATO forces and Israel. So I'm quite hopeful, but again, it's very difficult to make a guess at what comes next. And indeed, in the Iranian media today, they're still reporting that we could be 24 hours away from the next attack coming from America. And from American media, you can see this narrative developing that J.D. Vance is trying to talk Donald Trump out of attacking Iran, which is obviously, this is just a theater for people. ultimately, if they're going to attack Iran, they're all on board with it. And it's not impossible that they do that very soon. But again, I'm more hopeful than I even was in June 2025 of Iran's ability to outlast it.
Thank you very much, Morgan. And I
Can I
suspect I
comment?
sensed that Saeed there. I would like to hear what you were going to say, Saeed, there.
Brilliant, Morgan. Just want to add 2 points regarding the United States of America's attack and that in Iran. And Iran attacked the Zionist entity with 300 missiles, supersonic, and the rest of them. That the Israelis used all what the United States of America have and the West has, and that with THAAD missiles. United States of America ability to produce THAAD missiles is 50 rockets a year, no more. So imagine that, the capacity of that. With the problem, United States of America is going crazy around the world, Venezuela here and there, for rare minerals, which is needed for such a production, which is China. Even the silver now is not leaving China as a semiconductor kind of thing. This is, so the Iranian today, they said if they're gonna, the first barrage, if they've been hit, they will send 2,000 missiles. All the 12 days, they send 300,000 missiles, 300 missiles. So imagine 2,000 missiles with once the Iranian were sending their salvo of missiles in there, the British, they were intercepting. The Americans intercepting, the French, the German, all the Americans, Marines forces, and all of their pieces in the region and military bases were intercepting. So America depleted of that kind of air defense, which they needed, if anything, it broke that. So that can put a huge question mark, unless I am thinking wrongly in here. The other point, which is you mentioned, there is new geopolitical alliances happening when you mentioned Turkey in the region. And that is triggered by what's happening in Sudan and what's happening by the Zionist entity and United Arab Emirates, which is both of them think they are little Spartas united together, and they're going to divide the region among themselves, and they're going to control the waterways in there. So Trump, when he attacked Nigeria, was thinking of that belt coming from Libya down to Nigeria, then Chad, and suddenly goes into Sudan, and all of that supervised by the Zionist entity, and United Arab Emirates is supplying them with everything, the mercenaries from Colombia, the money, the all of these facilities, all of that, and suddenly moved to Yemen, which is they wanted to split Yemen, the Southern Republic of Yemen. That became so. I have an interview, I think, about this, which is from 2 parts, analyzing that what's happening in Yemen. It touched the nerve, strategic kind of national interest of Saudi Arabia when they came near a region called Hadramaut in Yemen. Hadramaut, it's the sort of the center of all the nerves of security for Saudi Arabia. Since it tried itself, Saudi Arabia, even to rent a corridor from the previous ruler of Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was martyred a few years ago. But they refused, the Yemenis, because the Saudis wanted to escape from the trianglement of the Strait of Hormuz or Bab el-Mandeb, these straits, to control the energy going to the west from Saudi Arabia. So they wanted to bring a pipeline from Aramco and the rest of Saudi Arabia going through Hadramaut to the Arabian Sea. Once they see Israel is putting a base in Socotra, an island in front of Yemen, it's Yemeni island. Once they see the Emiratis sending these mercenaries in Yemen to split and take these two regional, Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Turkey and Iran in the future. This is the 4 coming together. And they won't accept, so the Zionist entity with the proxies of the United States of America today are taking it from Gibraltar near Morocco, and they're coming to Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea and going to the Strait of Hormuz. So the Zionist entity will control that. Saudi Arabia is a huge country if you look at the size of it with resources. Iran is a huge country as well. Turkey is huge. We're talking about tiny United Arab Emirates and tiny Zionist entity, suddenly they are acting like they are the superpowers in the area. So today, this alliance is to stop the dream of having not a greater Israel, a greater Western Asia control by the Zionist entity. And once I spoke about that, as this is the face of the United States of America hegemony. They call it the greater Israel. It's the Israel. It's not. It's the American hegemony in there, since they put in their proxy to act on behalf of them, while the United States of America busy in the Western hemisphere in there, and it's putting its sphere of influence on top of Latin America. They wanted the Zionist entity to control that region and to expand into Africa with the help of the Zionists, with the help of the Emiratis. But today, you can see what happened in Sudan affects straight away Egypt. Even it's affect the Nile itself, the river which is Ethiopia tried to control, to put Egypt in a position to feel its people will be thirsty. So there's too many geopolitical games the Zionist entity and the Americans put their fingers in, and now they're not going to be burned. They're going to be cut off one by one in that region. And you'll see this this kind of direction taking place. Turkey is as well playing it in the north of Syria, because they see Qassad as a movement who's is part of Julani alliance of taking over Syria, trying to split the north of Syria to make a Kurdish entity for it, or controlled entity, supported by the United States of America, who's looting all the wealth of Syria from that region. The Turkish are not happy about that, and as well the Iranian not happy about that. The Syrian and the Iraqi is not happy about that. So this is making shift in the region. And watch the rise of the alliance between Egypt, Iran, and Turkey, and backed financially by Saudi Arabia. That's going to translate into supersonic missile production, drones production, the new kind of or the futuristic warfare will be developed in that region. And Saudi Arabia, who done the Chinese brokered the kind of peace deal between them and the Iranian, are they coming closer to each other? And this is when I hinted at the beginning when I spoke about Saudi Arabia not complying that much with the euro, with the what they call it, the petrodollar, and the Americans are going nuts about that. That's why you see them acting irrationally in there. So there is a huge shift in the area. I hope it will materialize soon.
Thank you, Saib. A nice conclusion to Morgan. What you
By the way, the Saudis for the first time week started fundraising for Gaza. They never did that all along. The whole thing only rhetoric. Saudis lining up to contribute money, jewelry, so many. They are over 2 billion they collected for Gaza. There is a huge things happening right now.
I wasn't aware of that, Saib. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to you, Stephen, maybe even to throw out some questions as well, but also the nature of this was Iran, obviously, but the focus looking on the media. And I know as an observer, you've a broad overview of how the media has handled this. And we're kind of like, at this stage, how on earth would anybody even think that what we're being told on BBC or The Guardian, so-called left, the liberal left newspapers, how on earth are people falling for it at this stage? Like, is there an explanation for it in your view, Stephen, or do you think now it's become ridiculous?
Thanks, Roisin. I wouldn't assume that all that many people are falling for it. The whole thing has a kind of going through the motions feel about it. I used to be, I mean, it seems like another lifetime, but I used to be an avid newspaper reader, like voracious. At one point, I think when I lived in Germany, I had subscribed to about 4 different newspapers. But it's long in the past. And yesterday morning, I just ran a little impromptu experiment. I pulled up the front pages of like 5 or 6 of the main kind of newspapers of record in the Western countries. So like Die Zeit in Germany, Le Monde, New York Times, Guardian, La Stampa. And what was, first of all, and good old New York, or good old Irish Times as well for a little bit of local. What was unbelievable was how much convergence there was between them. I mean, it was really like it all came from the exact same editorial desk. I mean, it was way too close. I was expecting at least a little bit more variety in terms of the angles or the stories, but they were identical. But apart from that, being identical, it was like it reminded me kind of like of a like a bad stage hypnotist or like a bad magician, like Tommy Cooper without the laughs. Like it's like they've have these tricks that kind of used to work and used to be effective, and now, like the center of imperial power, Pompeo, as Saeed mentioned earlier, basically boasting that Mossad are on the streets of Tehran, and Donald Trump, not sticking to the narrative at all. On they went into Venezuela supposedly to capture this dangerous narco terrorist, kind of the new Noriega, but he quickly dumped that in favor of we want the oil. So the kind of masters at the center of the empire have thrown out the pretense, and yet these, what would you call them? These propaganda outlets are still going through the motions because I guess they don't know what else to do. There's a sense of confusion. There's a sense of, it's like there's something really stale, bizarre, and yet fascinating about it. I don't assume that all that many people are buying it really, because I mean, they're acting as though Gaza didn't happen. They're acting like we've been asleep for the last 2 years, like it didn't happen. Like they don't even adapt the narrative to the fact that we had the 12-day war just 6 months ago, that we've had 2 years of a Western supported genocide. And I mean, I saw one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen today, which was, I mean, it really was stomach churning, but yet kind of hard to take my eyes off as well, which was Netanyahu talking about how heartbroken he was to see this carnage on the streets of Iran. I mean, really? Does anybody buy that? Really? I mean, do Israelis buy that? I doubt it. Does anybody, do the most ardent Zionists buy it? I don't think so. So it's like there's a zombie quality about all of this. It's maybe that's what happens between hubris and nemesis, is a kind of a strange theater of the absurd. And that's what I think we're going through now. So that's just my take on the media landscape right now is bizarre. I don't know if it's all that effective. There always will be kind of gullible people, but I don't see them manufacturing a whole lot of consent with this. They may go ahead anyway. I mean, they don't seem to care that much about manufacturing consent anymore. The mask is off, the gloves are off. They didn't try that hard to manufacture consent for Venezuela. So they'll probably go ahead and bomb Iran anyway. But again, on that, I also, like Morgan gave and Saeed both gave a very interesting kind of breakdown of the likely fate of that. They too have swallowed their own propaganda. I mean, I think the Israelis in particular are in absolute denial of what happened last summer. They, by all accounts, were hammered, and every serious commentator that I know of says they pleaded with the Americans to get a ceasefire because they realized that the Iranians were bringing out their big guns and the Israelis had no defense. And yet it's almost like they too are going through the motions and now somehow have kind of self-induced amnesia and think that they're dealing with some tin pot country that they can just hammer at their own discretion. Yeah, I mean, I think we're really at the point where hubris invites nemesis, which is obviously going to be very bloody, most likely.
Thank you very much. It's funny, there's an interesting comment from Dorothy in the side here. I think people are buying it. I fear that only those of us who've woken up since October 2023 understand what's happening. I think we have to be careful of the bubble that we too live in. Yeah, like we do tend sometimes live in an echo chamber if you have or if you have an interest in history. but we live in a fast food society where we just consume something and spit it out and it's all forgotten about as well. I'm going to finish off, maybe give the last words to you, Tommy, with the summary, and then we'll stop recording and maybe 15 minutes if people would like to hang on to chat. So what do you predict, Tommy, to see? Do you think there will be an invasion, the military operation, or have they?
I'm reluctant to predict what will happen in the future, but I can say that there's almost an imperative on imperialism to attack Iran, unfortunately. Now, will it be a ground invasion? I would doubt it very much, because the people of Iran will resist heroically. So what we could see is an attempt to do what Netanyahu done to Gaza, bomb from the area of bombardment. Whether that will change the situation completely or not is something else. What I'm afraid of course, is that we're heading rapidly towards a world war. And that's the real danger here, that they'll go and drag Russia, China. The United States is the leading imperial power, and it's in decline. Its power is receding, even down to the dollar, as Abe has pointed out. The dollar is starting to be challenged. There's a multipolar world. The fact that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran are starting now to talk to each other is tremendous challenge to imperialism, global imperialism. Not to mention the emergence of the BRICS. I'm afraid, and I do really fear, that the Yankee imperialism will find it imperative to make an attack of some description on Iran. I doubt very much if it will be a conclusive engagement, because the people of Iran have their experience from the past. They knew what happened in 1953. They know what happened in 1979 and since. And whatever we say about them, they're not going to give up easily. I think that's the somewhat depressing but realistic view I have. On the end of the day, I think imperialist powers are going to fall.
Could I come in there with a quick question for Tommy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tommy, I mean, do you think that China, considering that if Iran falls, they're essentially next, do you think China will invest a lot in making sure that Iran doesn't fall?
I'm not sure how they will or not, to be honest, Stephen, but I mean, I think China at some stage is going to be a victim of, it's going to be involved in a conflict. The United States is building its resources. I think it's the option of always of an apparent decline before it goes down. It will strike, attempt, the last desperate attempt. At some stage, China's going to have to take a decision. At what stage they can afford to allow the advance of imperialism to surround it and deny it its resources. But again, I'm always reluctant to go for a crystal ball.
Saeed, yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Very good question. Very good question. Let me just add, to start with, don't underestimate how powerful the United States of America as an imperialist power. It's by far stronger than a lot of powers put together. But as well, don't underestimate that the Chinese Communist Party in China, who's in charge of everything in China, it doesn't matter, there is millions of millionaires or that in China, and it's having the, what we call it, the planning, 5 years of planning design in China, which is growing every year. The battle of Iran is almost, I see it, the battle of the world. You consider the whatever logistic controls Iran holds on the heart of the vital transportations and logistics to Asia, which are the major routes of trade and energy for Russia and for China as well. Through Iran, there is the opportunity for China and Russia for the world trade routes. From the Mediterranean, take it to the Red Sea, to the North Pole, to the China Sea, to the Arabian Sea, and to the Indian Ocean. Without Iran, China will return to its normal position to being a Far East country, and Russia returns to being a far North country. Therefore, the whole world is following exactly what's happening right now between Iran and the Zionist kind of alliance led by the United States of America. So if the Iran fail under the hegemony of the Zionist kind of coalition, China will lose its advantage and Russia will lose advantage. So that's why they are heavily involved in supporting Iran, because they are supporting their own survival.
Thanks. Going to keep recording if that's okay, Morgan, and then Owen.
Sure. That kind of just listening to the guys there discuss. I suppose the likes of Saudi and Turkey, maybe the shifting sands and the curious bedfellows a rising common enemy might make. I think they signed a common defense pact, the Saudis and the Pakistan recently, and I think Turkey are wanting to get in on that. That's a curious development, particularly in the case of Saudi. Now, again, this is a case of everyone hedging their bets, because in the last 10 years, a lot of the more hardline elements in the Iranian aristocracy or the ruling class of Saudi Arabia were eliminated, effectively neutered by the current crown prince, who would be more favorable to the West in his own approach. So the shift in Saudi to, I suppose, again, hedging their bets with deals with China and a defense cooperation with Pakistan, who are closely aligned with China, and with Turkey, who are always playing every side in every conflict, is a curious development. Now, in the case of China and their relationship with Iran, I think very recent events might force China's hand, because a few years back, they signed that 25-year investment deal with Iran for a lot of the oil they get from Iran. They're not actually purchasing it in their own currencies. They're actually importing it with the idea that they will invest $400 billion in the oil and gas infrastructure in Iran, as well as just infrastructure in general. Now, there has been some complaints I've seen from Iran. I don't know how accurate they are, but that the Chinese have been slow to engage with this process, and that they haven't actually invested what they said they would up to this point in the agreement. However, given recent events, particularly in Venezuela, which cuts off China from, I think, in the region of 800,000 barrels a day, they've shifted that immediately onto Iran. So they've increased the imports from Iran. And I think this will ensure that China does engage with that 25-year agreement to the best of its abilities. So lots of shifting sand, but it'll be very, very interesting to see what China will do over the coming months and year, perhaps, in Iran, assuming, of course, which I think they will, that they will weather whatever storm is coming their way. And that's not to say that China mightn't have already been involved in the shutting down of Starlink over Iran. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on as well, because if that is the case, then that will severely sour US-Chinese relations, and not a moment too soon.
Thank you very much, Morgan. We have one more question, so I'd like to first of all say thank you very much to our panelists, Barry Murray, Tommy McKerney of the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum, for your contributions, and joined by comrades as well, Paul and Niall. Thank you very much to Stephen Roach, to Morgan O'Hearda, and to Dr. Saeed Shah. We'll see you all next week. Slán go fóill.